if you can truly make yourself forget what you truly are, and then go on one of the great heroic journeys to return to the point where you awake again and remember who you truly are, the joy and the meaning that is going to provide to you, that is a game that you could play across billions of years. That is a game that is going to make all of the suffering of life worthwhile.
And so the moment he saw the sister, the little guy immediately knew her childhood name that she didn't use anymore for decades. So he had 50 memories of his past life, and all these memories, they checked it against the sister, and she all confirmed they were true.
Gretchen, we had a wonderful comment he made about realization, about realizing and waking up to your truest nature, your highest nature. And he said, before realization, the price is far too high. After realization, the price is far, far too low.
One idea is that the soul wants to experience itself through what it is not, through its opposite, which is matter. And so then the soul, when it first takes incarnation, it enters into the mineral world, so it's lifeless objects, stones, but also objects, table, chair, everything has a soul in our world.
The answer, though, which is just fascinating for me, when I heard it, it really nearly floored me. And so he who is immortal, he who is omniscient, he who is omnipotent, what is he lacking? He is lacking.
Hello, seeker friends, and welcome to the Acceptance of Life podcast. This is episode 5, and this episode is all about reincarnation and the journey of the soul. What is the purpose of reincarnation? What happens before we are born in our pre-birth existence? And why does our soul willingly choose to live life here on earth, which is so often beset with difficulties and suffering? We also talk about the scientific evidence surrounding reincarnation. It's actually there, and it's highly, highly interesting. And we dive into the 5 divine criteria that make the cosmic game on Earth worthwhile and interesting. Our conversation further branches out and includes topics such as the balance between good and evil, the hard problem of consciousness, and panpsychism, the idea that there is consciousness in all things, animate and inanimate. So if you always wanted to know about past lives, why we have past lives, and what lessons we can learn from them, and if you want to know how far back this cosmic game of ours really goes, then I'm sure that you'll enjoy this episode. If you like our podcast, please consider subscribing. Thank you again for watching and listening. All right, Vajin, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So today, I really wanted to talk about reincarnation and the journey of the soul. So I think it's a very, very vast subject in spirituality, and it's intensely interesting. So I actually talk about this a lot in my meditation classes, and it's always one of the most interesting classes and topics. Yeah, somehow I feel that if properly understood, reincarnation can really enrich your spiritual life, and you can really take away some really valuable lessons for this life. And I think for most of our listeners, reincarnation is not something that they're very skeptic about. I think most of them, people who are interested in spirituality and spiritual life, will naturally have a tendency to accept the philosophy of reincarnation. But if there are any skeptics, it's interesting to note that there has actually been some scientific research into reincarnation. Are you aware of that?
No, I have not heard about this.
So about 10, 12 years ago, I wrote an article in my life as a freelance journalist. I wrote an article about reincarnation for this spiritual magazine in the Netherlands. And so I had to research it a little bit. And I came across this American psychiatrist or psychologist, Ian Stevenson, or maybe he was British. But so he was actually studying the phenomenon of reincarnation from a scientific, almost anthropological standpoint. So what he would do is he would gather stories of children who had memories of their past lives, at least was what they claimed. So they started talking about, when they were big, or they started talking about this person that they were before. And so in India, actually, this is quite common because there the reincarnation is accepted into the culture. And so he actually traveled to India and did a lot of research on children. And so usually when children are between the ages of 2 and 5, they start talking about memories of their past lives, if they have them. And so what he did is he meticulously noted down the stories, and then he checked if they could be verified. So sometimes, these stories were so detailed that the children were able to give like the name and the location where they lived in their previous life and the name of their family members. They had some detailed memories. And so what he did was he went back to that place, and sometimes those people, or many times, those people were still alive. And then he checked if the memories could be verified. And so in many cases, he solved the case. And so for him, like a solve was when the person could be identified from the child's memories.
Wow.
And also the memories could be verified. So he would check against the living people if that was correct. And these memories were like, they could never be invented. They were like really detailed things. So like one famous case was a girl in India who knew that there was some money buried in the back garden of her previous life and her previous family. And so, they went there and they talked to her husband who was still alive. And they started digging in the back garden, but they didn't find anything there. And so then the husband said, oh, actually, I there was some money there, but I actually dug it up already and moved it somewhere else. And sometimes, kids would have up to 50 of these past life memories, very detailed, people they knew, things like that.
50 from one past life or from multiple past lives?
No, from one past life. So it was their immediate past life.
So 50 different memories that they held from that previous life.
Exactly. I mean, that's like the maximum. Sometimes there were like 10. And so, a solved case is what Ian Stevenson would consider the gold standard of past life. And he actually had a file with 895 of these solved cases. And he concluded there can be no, plausible explanation for this other than this was a past life.
Yes.
So that was like a scientific document of all these different stories. And there's actually a very famous one from America. And there's a book written about that called Soul Survivor. And it talks about this little kid called James Leininger. And when he was 2 years old, he started having really bad nightmares. So he started screaming, plane on fire, little man can't get out. And this would happen every night. And, his parents were worried about that. And they started asking him questions. So they started asking him, so who is the little guy? And then he said, it's me. And what is the plane on fire? Yeah, the plane is being bombed by Japanese bombers. This little kid would be able to give like details. And so the parents had so many details, at some point they started to see if they could track down, because by now they knew he was talking about probably a past life. And the parents were skeptic, they didn't really believe in reincarnation, but they thought, okay, this is so much detail. And they were able to track down this fighter pilot who died in World War II in 1945 when he was 21 years old. And his name was James Houghton. And they were able to track down the still living sister of this pilot. And they went to her with little James. By now he was maybe 3, 4, 5 years old. And so the moment he saw the sister, the little guy immediately knew her childhood name that she didn't use anymore for decades, and called her by that childhood name. And he was able to, so he had 50 memories of his past life, and all these memories, they checked it against the sister, and she all confirmed they were true. And they even took the little guy, little James, to this gathering of war veterans. And he was there, and he saw this guy, this by now old guy, maybe 80 years old, sitting there. And he went up to him and said, "You're Bob Greenwald." And the guy was like, "Yeah, that's my name. How do you know?" And so the kid still remembered his old fighter buddy, Bob Greenwald, and was a friend of this pilot. And this is amazing. So, there was so much memory and detail. And then what the parents actually did, they took their son back to the actual location of where the plane was hit, because by now they knew where it happened. It was somewhere off the coast of a Japanese island. And so they went by boat to this place where the plane had crashed into the sea. And then when they got there, the little boy started crying uncontrollably. And they threw flowers into the sea, and they had a really nice ritual. And that's actually when the nightmares and the memories stopped. And so it was kind of like a closure for the little kid. I saw an interview where they interviewed him. He's now in his 20s. And he says yeah, that was like a really strange episode in my life, but now it's completely behind him. And so it seems like those memories are really triggered by violent deaths. So if people die, suddenly or in an accident or something like that, then apparently there's like a threat there's a really powerful memory that carries over into the next life. And so many of the cases that Ian Stevenson researched, they also had to do with violent deaths, and which is interesting, right? So it's like the life is not really closed properly, it's suddenly, and then there's some kind of imprint left in the soul which carries over to the next life.
And it's interesting as well that it's just for a certain point in this life, like at a certain age, that also gets left behind as well.
Yeah. So when kids, when kids are between 2 and 5 years old, then most of these memories, if they have memories, they come up, they surface. But then when they become, like, it's also documented, when they turn 7, 8 years old, the memories fade again. And so in the West, many times this is not picked up by the parents. So, the kid could be saying, oh, when I was big, I was this accountant, or I was this athlete or whatever. And the parents is like, yeah, sure. It's just kids' fantasy. But if those parents who really go and ask questions, and sometimes it really brings out a lot of very detailed memories, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
I even had a friend of mine was a teacher at kindergarten, and she had one boy in particular she told me the story of, and she remembered he was always seemed very sad and unnaturally so compared to all of the other children. So once she went and asked him what the problem was, and he said that he was really missing his wife and his children. And she looked at him and she said, "Your wife and your children? You seem too young for this." And he started telling her the story of his life as a farmer, and he had these children, and he had this wife that he was missing deeply in this life. And she mentioned it to his parents one day if he talked about things like that. And they said he's always talking about farming. Like he always is saying it's good, would be good weather to go plant the crops today. And he's obsessed with farming machinery. So it's really funny how these real practical inclinations can also carry across.
Yeah. Yeah, many times, skills, sometimes talents, they carry over, and sometimes they don't. And so I know that our teacher Sri Chinmoy talked about how sometimes the soul is like unhappy with how it has manifested a skill or a talent in one incarnation, and then it often will carry over to the next life. This sometimes can happen with composers, and this kind of could explain, the idea of prodigy children. So children who are like, 4 or 5 years old, and they're like brilliant already in some field. Either it's music, or they know, 4 different languages, or they're like brilliant in some area. And this is for me clear that it's definitely a talent that they developed in the past life and just almost entirely carried over. Mozart, didn't he like start composing his first symphony when he was 5?
Yeah,
Which
so
is like
perhaps
incredible.
they're not learning it in this lifetime, they're remembering, or they're relearning, or just
Yes.
becoming reacquainted with their capacities from a previous life.
Yeah. But it can also happen that the soul is totally satisfied with a certain skill. It doesn't want to manifest that anymore. Let's say it's music, and it feels it has manifested enough, and then very often that doesn't carry over. So it doesn't mean that if somebody was like an excellent composer, that he will always be musical in all his future incarnations. But then the soul wants to develop, wants to discover something new, and enter into new areas of life.
So if you say that we have some really good evidence for this idea of reincarnation, why do you think so many people are so skeptical or resistant to taking on that concept, or to just even trying to put it as a possibility?
Yeah, well, it has a lot of implications.
Mm.
So, for instance, if you're brought up in a very Christian background, where you, for instance, believe that after you die, you enter into an eternal life, whether it's in heaven or in hell, that already says, okay, there's no such thing. There can't be anything as reincarnation, because after I die, I enter into an eternal life in heaven, if you are a good person. And so I think for those people, the idea of reincarnation really clashes with their religious beliefs. And so they might be, naturally disinclined to believe it. And I actually think you'd be surprised how many people who are not tied to any religion, who are maybe more open-minded, would accept the idea of reincarnation. Like, I see so many times people, maybe jokingly, but talk about like past lives, or, oh yeah, it's in my future life, I will do this and this. So I have seen it grow over the years, like being much more widely accepted. And I think skepticism, still might be there. If, like we talked about the mechanical universe in one of the previous episodes. And so if you're really stuck into this worldview of the materialistic world, then for those people after you die, that's it. Your bones and your molecules like disintegrate, and that's it for your life. there's nothing after death.
Yeah.
What would you say?
So yeah, I always think as well, especially when people are vehemently opposed to the concept, I'm always slightly suspicious of what they're getting up to in their own time. Because the idea that life continues beyond this one physical life, if you know in this one life that you are perhaps not acting in tune with reality or in alignment with your own highest ideals, there is a slight fear that there could be some judgment or punishment. And the idea that consciousness is continuing to future lives leaves it open for that to be the case. So I see some people who really go on the offensive and really, really attack this, just even the concept of it. And I'm always suspicious that perhaps it's out of their own sense of trying to save themselves from some judgment in the future, that they've got
Yeah,
vested interest.
exactly. Very human to do so. Yeah. Well, then I think it's good to remember that, I mean, there might be some fair judgment there, but I don't think there's like, unless you were really a bad person, I do believe that there's some punishment, but it's like it's a purification for the soul. So this punishment is not just to be malicious or anything like that, but sometimes the soul needs to learn some hard home truths that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, for most people, it's just like, I mean, you see that in people who had near death experiences, right? So they very often talk about a moment where they see their whole life flash by, the moment that they leave the body, they die. And in that flashback, they see all the good things they did, all the bad things they did, and they experience their life through all the other people that they affected. I mean, so that is probably the ultimate, let's say, punishment or judgment, where you feel all your actions through all the other people that you affected, both good and bad. And so if you did a lot of bad actions, you deceived a lot of people, you lied and cheated and whatever, that really feels horrible when you have that experience.
Yeah,
And
because
there,
you get the consequence of your actions, and it's not just the consequence from your perspective, it's the consequence from the other person who's been betrayed or let
yes,
down or disappointed or hurt.
yeah,
And
yeah,
you've got a good story about someone who was a fraudster to do with that, don't
yes,
you?
yeah. I was gonna tell that story exactly. It's a well documented story of a person who was, yeah, like a real fraudster. He deceived people financially during his life, like he did money scams, and he became very rich off of that. Like I think even millionaire, multimillionaire. And he had an accident and basically died or had a near death experience. And in that situation, he experienced all his deceptions through all the people he deceived. So he felt every person that he ever scammed, he felt how it felt for them. And it was so many people and so many times that it was like when he got back from that near death experience, he actually got back into his body and he lived miraculously. He was so shocked by what his behavior had caused that he completely changed his life. So he actually decided to pay back all his victims because they were still alive. So he tracked down each and every person he ever deceived and paid them back to the penny. And so when he'd done all that, he was basically broke. Like he had no money left. And he became a social worker. So he felt I have to do something meaningful. It's
Yeah,
it's
wow.
incredible how a story, how an experience like that, how transformative that can be. And it's like that's very often what people feel who have a near death experience. That sometimes they get a second chance or they get a new perspective on life. So that's, I think, also how powerfully the idea of what happens after our death can influence how we live our life.
Yeah. And so what would you say is the purpose then of these continuing lives? Should we look a little bit deeper into
Yes, please. Let's do
yeah.
that. Well, I think it has to do with the big picture, the journey of the soul. So actually, I wrote down this beautiful quote by Rumi, the Persian poet, and maybe just start with that. He said, or he wrote, I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying?
Oh,
So this
that
this for me encapsulates the journey of the soul. So many spiritual
yeah.
masters talk about how the soul enters into the material world, this physical earthly reality, to experience itself in matter. And matter is very dense and very, you can almost say dark in a sense. When soul is in its own world, it's all spirit, it's all delight, it's all joy and
Yeah, it's
beauty.
all
And when it comes,
illumination. And then you
Yeah,
come into matter and it's all unillumined matter, we could say.
exactly. It's lifeless, it's inert, and it's completely opposite of what the soul really is. So, that's one idea, is that the soul wants to experience itself through what it is not, through its opposite, which is matter. And so then the soul, when it first takes incarnation, it enters into the mineral world. So lifeless objects, stones, but also objects, table, chair, everything has a soul in our world. Everything is, you could say, energized by a spirit. And it sounds really weird when you say that, like, how can a table have a soul? But strangely enough, for the soul, that is a real valuable experience, just to hang out in a lifeless matter for some time and just get its first taste of what this material life is. But there's no active conscious life there. It's just, that's its first experience. And then after some time, when it feels it has experienced enough in the mineral kingdom, it moves up to the plant kingdom. As Rumi said, I died as mineral and I became a plant.
And already that's a huge transformation, isn't it? To
For
go
sure.
from the consciousness in the mineral kingdom is going to be very barely conscious of changes, perhaps in temperature, if it's in the sun or it's in the shade, or perhaps a very strong light or something would make some impact on it.
You could argue that a chair has some real service it provides. So some objects, like if you would be a chair, you would provide a real service to people. People sit on you and use you. And even that, I think, is like a valuable experience where the soul experiences it can even be of help to others that way. But yeah, it's true. It's very, very, very base. And
Yeah, it's just pure existence, but with very little, very subtle graduations in experience, like the bare minimum to be in existence, you
so
could
that,
say.
of course, changes when you become a plant. Then there's more life. So
Yeah,
plants
and
experience emotions.
I would say mineral as well. It would stretch over very long periods of time. Like
Yes.
to get the feeling of being a rock or a crystal or any sort of mineral or material matter like that, the time spans I think would be very long in that
Yeah.
space to get the
Yes.
sense. You don't be a rock for 2 days and say that
No.
you know how to be a rock.
Exactly. Yeah, I think so too. That whole experience comes with vast expenses of time. And I think, of course, in the plant world, I think that's still the case. If you can be a tree, you can live for centuries.
Mm.
And so in the plant world, there's more life, there is growth, there is, you can interact more with the outside world.
Yeah,
There
there's
is emotions, plants
communication.
react to emotions.
Yeah, there's movement as well
Exactly.
as they move towards the sun.
Yeah. And there's development, they can grow flowers, and if you're a plant or a tree or a shrub, and fruits, and they
Yeah,
can provide shade and like even, serve humanity in that way and provide some service to animals and to other beings. And they communicate, right? It's in the forest,
mm,
like trees have this really intricate root system where they're in contact with all the other trees in the forest, and they have some sort of, integral communication network going. So I think they're much more complex beings than we give them credit for.
yeah, indeed. And I think there's some, like, I think aspen trees, like a whole grove of aspen trees are all connected together. I think they're all coming from one source. And also, I think one of the largest, or perhaps the largest living organism is some sort of giant mat of fungi.
Wow.
So, yeah, they are tremendously interesting and tremendously more conscious, perhaps, than we give them credit for.
Yes. Yeah, and there's also people who communicate with trees, for instance, and who really feel that they can establish a rapport with a tree, with a shrub, with a plant, So anyway, that's the plant kingdom, and then from there, if it's the soul has experienced enough and wants to move on, then, as Rumi said, I died as a plant and rose to animal. And in the animal kingdom, you know, it goes with, needless to say, there's much more life happening, right? Life becomes
Exactly.
really much more exciting, conscious. Then there is real connection with other beings. You can raise a
Yes.
family as an animal. You can care for others more. You're much more. There's much more movement happening, but there's also fear, and there's survival. There's a struggle for survival. There's all kinds of adventures that animals can have, but also a lot of really spiritual qualities, I would say, that animals can display. You can be very loyal to others and have sacrifice themselves. And so there's all kinds of qualities that come into the game becomes more interesting, I would say.
Yeah, because you do see some animals, and they do seem to have a tremendous sense of poise. Like a good example might be an elephant in Africa, and I know that they have seen that elephants will often, to honor the passing of an important member of the tribe, on a certain the certain time of every year, they might trek huge distances to come to the place where that elephant passed away, or to pay their respects. There is a deep sense of connection, and there's memory, and there's um, a deep sense of some profound qualities. Like another example might be the great whales of the earth,
Yes.
and another of those wonderfully large and beautiful creatures we share the planet with. And I know they've been doing a lot of research into the whales, the songs of the whales. And I know they see now that each season new songs begin, and I think they begin in the southern hemisphere in the summertime. And those songs over the course of the year will pass through all of the whales. And so it'll start in one place, it'll be composed, you could say, or channeled or brought down by some particular whales, and they'll start singing the song. And then by the end of that year, all of the whales of that species around the world will be singing that same. It's like the hit song of the summer in Europe.
It becomes viral in a
Yeah.
sense.
So,
Wow.
there's definitely a lot of profound depth. And I know some of the spiritual masters have said themselves that there's some animals on earth that are more evolved than some humans.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. And there's also some animals that are closer to the human kingdom. They're kind of like transition animals. So, when the soul has experienced its fill of the animal world, of course, it becomes human, enters into the human kingdom. And it really often does that through like these kind of, transitional animals that are so close to the human kingdom. So, for instance, the elephants, dogs, horses, cats, monkeys, and they're you could say they're part of the more evolved animals instead of being like an insect or a crustacean or something like that, where you have a very kind of minimum um, possibilities for growth and consciousness. And some animals really are very conscious, and as people who own dogs very often, it's their best friend, right? So dogs can really exhibit love and friendship and loyalty and devotion, and so it's
And
wonderful that they are
And do you
companions
feel
to
as
us.
though there's some sort of natural progression through each of these stages? So through the mineral, through the animal, through the plant, is it moving towards higher and higher levels of intelligence and complexity within each of those categories?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the soul's movement is always forward to more and more consciousness, and in that sense, more complexity. In a sense, more options for consciousness. So I would say that in the plant world, you may start out as a small shrub, and end up as a huge tree, for instance. I would say that is a progression where you experience more and more possibilities for growth and consciousness. And definitely in the animal world, like there's different species of animals with different evolved consciousness. And so, yeah, for sure that the soul makes its journey also through the animal kingdom in growth of consciousness and being more and more evolved. There's actually a really cute story about our teacher, Sri Chinmoy. He was a great animal lover, right? His house was like full of animals. He had a lot of birds. He always owned dogs. He was very fond of his dogs. He had a whole menagerie in his I think in his house. And so one of his dogs at one time, I think it was ill, and it didn't have much longer to live. Sri Chinmoy said that it could arrange for the dog to have a human incarnation. So Sri Chinmoy, being a spiritual master, having access to all these realms, was able to kind of arrange for the dog to have like a human incarnation. And for the soul, that's definitely a step up from the animal kingdom to the human kingdom. We'll talk about that more. But he said that his dog didn't want the human incarnation. It wanted to be a lion and an elephant first.
Oh, wonderful. So it had its own ideas about what
Yeah,
progression it would like to
it
take.
had its own desires to fulfill still. And then I think Sri Chinmoy said to his students, you may laugh at this, but you people are the same. I'm offering you realization, liberation, all these spiritual things, but you want to fulfill your desires, or you want to become this person, or have that kind of fame and name and whatever, influence or wealth. And so he did relate it to, look, this animal has these desires, human beings also have desires, and sometimes that can stand in the way of our spiritual progression.
Hmm.
Very cute story, I think.
Yeah, it really is. And it's really nice because every time you realize that it's more complex than you perhaps superficially thought, like the process of evolution through reincarnation, And you see it's more logical than you thought, perhaps. Because I remember being a young child, and there was a documentary on television, and it was talking about, it must have been about India, and it showed someone stepping on an insect. And it was saying that in this country, they think that if you step on an insect, you may be reborn as an insect. And as a young child, I immediately saw that, and I thought, no, like there's no way that is how it works. So like
Yeah.
you don't go human, there's just suddenly straight back to insect.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that's a criticism or a problem people have with this idea of reincarnation. They think it's some sort of random thing, that maybe you'll be a
Right.
tree and then you're a lion and then you're a human and then you go back to an insect. And it doesn't seem that's the sort of universe we're in. Like we see, you want the beliefs you have to have some aspect be shown to you in other areas of the world. So if you believe a certain set of ideas, but you see zero evidence for it in the world, like the idea that, we randomly are jumping around between different sorts of life forms from really complex to really simple, you don't see that seems to be how life is developing on Earth or the universe is developing. So yeah, I always think it's nice to see that there is some patterns to it, and there is some beauty and some elegance to the concept. And it's actually, as you look into it more and more, you see it's far more beautiful and elegant than you can imagine. And even that idea that there was a dog out there who still had this unfulfilled wish. He really wanted to try being a lion and an elephant. And it's like, yeah, great. Like, of course, like, don't rush to be a human. I mean, come on, you can do that later on down the road.
Experience life a little, live a little
Yeah,
first.
that's what
Yeah.
I'd say. I'd say, good on you. Like, get
Good on
out
them.
there, try a few
Exactly.
things. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, no, I really, resonate with that idea that it's absolutely a beautiful and elegant idea of reincarnation. There's meaning to it, there's purpose to it, and for the soul, the purpose, I think, is to know itself fully in this material world. So that's the progression that it makes. And so,
Yeah,
from the last jump it makes from the animal kingdom, and as Rumi said, I died as animal and I was man. So then we get into, I would say, the penultimate kingdom, because I think after the human kingdom, we're still the divine kingdom. But
yeah.
from the human kingdom, then I would say the cosmic game really starts,
The
right?
cosmic game. I love game. You love
Then
game.
you're finally there. You've experienced yourself enough in matter. You're like, okay, now I'm ready for the big game, for the serious game, the game of the human life. And then also what happens is that your actions have consequences. And so
Uh,
there is definitely punishment and reward, what we can call karma, connected to your actions. And you are held accountable in the human life. Which makes the game interesting, right? So you
yeah,
have a choice in your human life. As an animal, you don't really have that much choice. You live out, like we talked about in the last episode, you live out your inherent nature. You live by instinct, and sometimes you can do beautiful things as an animal, and sometimes you have to be ferocious and hunt and kill. But there's not much choice. You're not self-aware, and that's the big change that happens in the human kingdom, that we become self-aware, we become conscious, and we have a choice there to choose between right and wrong, to choose to be aligned with our soul, or to be aligned with, let's say, the body, vital mind, the lower parts of our nature, or to act against our own cosmic nature. And that is a whole journey in itself through the human kingdom to reach finally the divine. And that's super interesting.
that is super interesting, and I think that's something that we should flesh out a little bit. Because I think reincarnation as a standalone concept, I think there's a lot of people who can get into that. Like they can say, okay, and I see it more and more as well, that people kind of talk about it as like an interesting subject, and they throw it around as something that perhaps they don't fully invest in it, but they believe there's some possibility there. So that's something. But the idea that we are playing some type of cosmic game, now that's something that I don't think people often consider. And for that to be true, and for that to be meaningful, and for that to be something that you want to invest your time and energy into, that has to be something that you need to perhaps flesh out and look into and dive into a little bit, which is perhaps what we could do. Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
So
Would you like to start?
yeah, so I've been thinking about the cosmic game because it seems reincarnation seems to have some sort of value when you see it as some part of some grand cycle of evolution and progress. And when we talk about a game, though, a game is a very particular type of thing. And so a game by its very nature means that it has some aim or some goal. And so for a lot of people, that would be at both the same time absolutely terrifying, but absolutely on another level, absolutely thrilling to think that they lived in a universe that had some meaning and purpose. Because we've lived the last 200 years with science trying to drum that idea out of our heads and trying to convince us that we live in a dumb and blind universe and that our consciousness is some sort of strange epiphenomenon of the material world, and that it's not fundamental.
It's a byproduct of our brain, right?
Exactly.
We are led to believe.
Exactly. And so the idea that there must be an aim or a goal if we're playing a cosmic game, like for me, that's really interesting. But before that, we have to step even back further. And this is a really hard thing for people to grasp, but spiritual masters have talked about this very clearly, that there was a time before creation. So there was a time when existence was one unified existence, and there was no creation. And so for us, that just makes no sense. Like, we live in a material universe. We understand the world through our senses and perhaps through our consciousness, but it's very hard being an embodied being to think that there was a time where there was only the one indivisible consciousness. And we can call that God. We can call that sort of the supreme. In our tradition, we often talk about the supreme, because the supreme, I think, takes away some of the cultural byproducts of the idea of God. So we might use the word supreme for this conversation.
Spirit or source.
Yeah, the divine. I also like to talk about the divine. The supreme is really great, though, because it captures some idea that for something to be truly the highest divinity, it needs to be continuously transcending itself. Because if it was not continuously transcending itself, there's a great idea that everything is either evolving or devolving, but nothing is really ever remaining the same. So this divine consciousness, for it to be the greatest or the highest or the most profound or the most illumined, it cannot stay idle. It needs to continuously be revealing itself in some new way. So
also, if we evolve as beings, if we are creations of the Supreme and we are evolving, we are transcending, then, Creator, how can he be otherwise? How can she be otherwise?
Yeah. So there's this idea that there was a period where the divine was one. And then at some point, the divine brought about a creation. And you and I were talking sometime recently about there's, as well as near-death experiences, there's also another type of experience called a PBE, which means a pre-birth experience. And
PBE.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
pre-birth experience. And both of you and I have listened to a very interesting interview with a man who's got these really interesting pre-birth experiences. But
I have only listened to your telling of the episode.
Okay, so you'll have to trust me.
You told me in so much detail. It was beautiful.
Yeah, but he talks really in a really interesting way that there was a time where the Supreme had decided to create a new universe. And so at this point, the Supreme had obviously already had gone from the one to the many, but this was beings in some subtle or psychic realm. And so he has these memories from this etheric or subtle or a higher vibrational reality. But he remembers when the word went out through this space of being, this place, that the Supreme was going to create a new universe. And he said the excitement and the thrill that it brought to these beings was just unbelievable. And so I always thought that was so cute and so interesting that there was existence before this material existence, because you would probably imagine that if you went from the one indivisible Supreme to making a creation, you wouldn't go all the way down to dense matter in the first step. There'd probably be some layers of creation before that. So you're making the higher worlds or the more subtle worlds, and then creation is coming down. And then at some point you say, okay, this is it. We're going to do it. We're going to create a universe.
You think it was the plan right from the outset to do that? Right?
I have no idea, but for me that seems like that would be the natural way of consciousness spiraling down. And it wouldn't take this leap for me down to, straight into the lowest form of, three-dimensional matter. So, but anyway, that's kind of gives you a little bit of, a schema in the beginning. This was the case, and even science has to admit something very strange happened there. It's one of those things where science will say, just give us one miracle for free, and then we'll explain the rest.
Yeah, the science calls it the Big Bang, right?
Yeah, because the Big Bang, the laws of the universe did not exist. So the laws of physics and the physical universe did not exist in the Big Bang. Because in that moment, before creation exploded into being or expanded into being, there is a place there where that does not make sense to science. Like, you cannot have all of the matter of the universe condensed down to the size of, an infinitesimally small point.
Yeah.
That does not make sense.
So that is the one free miracle.
Yeah, so we give them that one, and then they attempt to explain the rest. But so let's say that's the beginning of creation, like in this form that we understand and we know. And the question would be, if you were indivisible divine consciousness with all capacities, why would you go about creating a universe? And so that would be my question. And when you think about that, the qualities of the divine are immortality, so always in existence; omniscient, so everywhere all at once; omnipotent, so able to do anything and everything. And actually, the Jewish tradition has a very interesting concept where they have their own version. I would call it almost like a Zen koan of these concepts which you need to attempt to grapple with. And one of the key ones for them is he who is immortal, he who is omniscient, he who is omnipotent. What is he lacking? And so for me, that's a fascinating thing to think about. For a long time, I didn't really understand why the divine created the universe, because it seems the universe, in its very nature, there's an infinite number of problems that are also created. And it seems like it would be much easier for a universe not to exist. For a universe to exist, so much time and energy and matter needs to come into play. So it seems always it would be easier for there to be no existence than for there to be existence. And so the answer, though, which is just fascinating for me, when I heard it, it really nearly floored me. And so he who is immortal, he who is omniscient, he who is omnipotent, what is he lacking? He is lacking limitation. And when I heard that limitation, I was like, that makes sense. Because this is the nature of being. The nature of anything is to want what it does not have. So just as human beings often would like to be rich and powerful because they're lacking in those things, the divine being and the divine consciousness would like to experience what we have in spades, limitation. And so this makes sense as well why you would bring consciousness into the density of matter. Because the thing is that when you bring infinite consciousness, so let's say that inside each human being there is a spark of the divine. So what I mean by spark of the divine is I mean an infinitesimal point of light from the divine consciousness. So it's the same essential reality, but it's in an infinitesimally small portion. And let's say that exists in every single life, every single object, every single aspect of the universe is imbued with this consciousness. And as you stated, in the beginning, you'll start at the very lowest level of consciousness and awareness, which is the mineral. And so then that consciousness has come into being, and it's going to move up through those stages. So immediately, then the divine consciousness is experiencing limitation. And so that is one part of the game. But also, that's not enough. Like, if I was infinite consciousness, I would not start an entire universe just to experience limitation. I would think, okay, I would put myself in a box or in a small room, perhaps, or, in a rock, just for a small period of time and say, okay, that's good. I got my...
A few thousand years, maybe.
I got my fill. That's enough. So for me, like, I have to think it through. What would be the purpose of having a universe? Because the universe for me is a game. And so as we talked about before, and so a game has an aim or a goal to it. And so I've written down a few points that for me, for the cosmic game to be truly transcendent in its beauty and its majesty, and for it to truly be something that would be a creation of the divine, I have my own set of rules, my own set of requirements that I would like it to fulfill. So
this is if you would be the creator, you just put yourself in the shoes of the creator.
Yes,
and say,
exactly.
okay, this is what I would do.
Or
Interesting.
even if I was a human being here, this is these are the things that would make the universe make sense to me.
Okay.
If the cosmic game fulfills these requests that I'm making,
Yes.
then I would say, okay, I'm willing to play this game. It makes sense to me. And
I'm dying to hear your conditions.
so the first condition is the cosmic game in some way must make sense of the suffering of Earth. It
Mm.
must have enough depth and beauty and poignancy, and it must be so transcendent the goal that you're aiming for that the suffering, the pain, the hardship, the evil that is faced by simply by being part of existence, that has to be made right. That has to be the price that we pay for being here has to be transcended, or the reward or the goal that we attain must make all of that suffering meaningful.
Worthwhile, because that's often an argument people use against the existence of God. Like,
Yeah,
how could God create a world where there's so much suffering and so much
yeah.
misery?
But
Like,
one
that
of the
would be that would be a really evil God to do that.
exactly, and one of the best arguments of it is what sort of God would make it that dogs would die from eating chocolate? And I agree. I'm like, yeah, like what is up with
Do
that?
they do that? Do dogs actually die from eating
Apparently,
chocolate?
dogs are so allergic to chocolate that if they
Okay,
eat,
don't feed your dogs any chocolate, people.
yeah, if
Don't
that's
do
the
it.
one thing you learned today, that is an important takeaway.
That's a good takeaway. We'll put
So,
it in the takeaways.
anyway, so that's my first requirement, that it needs to make the suffering of existence worthwhile.
I love it. I gave it a few stars there. That's good. Give it
Oh,
five
good.
stars.
So the second problem is, or the second request is, it needs to solve what's known as the hard problem. And so
The hard problem.
the
Okay.
hard problem is an idea in philosophy, especially the philosophy of mind. And it says, how does something that is non-material come from the material world? So how does our consciousness come from unconscious material? And so the game needs to make sense of that, because that is, that is a fundamental problem that
But it doesn't though, does it? It doesn't come from material
no, so this is
objects.
the thing. This is the thing, that our consciousness does not come from the material structures, because that's the thing. Like, you could make an argument like, why is it that you have to have the experience of fear? Why is it not that you could just simply see a lion? Your optic nerves could register there's a lion. It could give an impulse to your brain, which will make you move away. Like, why do you have to have this very experiential period and experience of terror and fear? It doesn't
Very
seem like that,
unpleasant.
yeah, it doesn't seem like that is necessary for the functioning of the response. And so that's what's known as the hard problem. And so we have to see, can this model of the cosmic game that we're coming up with, that we're going to look into, can it resolve that problem? So that's something else I would like it to do.
Okay, we're not just posing these questions, we're going to solve them as well,
We
aren't we?
hopefully, I hope so.
Okay.
I hope we can
That,
get to some
that
resolution
is
here.
our aim. That is our aim. We have to solve them.
So this is this is the third requirement. The third requirement is the game needs to be optimally difficult. So it needs to be optimally difficult, so it will be the most enjoyable and meaningful game to play over the longest period of time. So
Wow,
if
and the
the
longest period
game
of time is eternity?
eternity, exactly. Because the thing is,
Yeah.
if you're an immortal being, you have an infinite period of time to play with. So there's no point making a game, going to the effort of creating a game, and it takes 100 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that would just be ludicrous. Like, to go to
Yeah.
all the effort to make a universe and then it's finished in 5,000 years, 10,000 years. To me, that seems ludicrous. If you've got an infinite amount of time, stretch things out a bit. What are we at? We're at 13.7 billion years in this universe so
I
far.
mean, we hardly ever started. Come on.
Yeah,
In
so
terms of
we make
eternity?
we're working through it nicely. And I think optimally difficult means that if it's too easy, like if you've played any game and it's too easy, very quickly you lose interest in it.
Oh, for
And
sure. Like,
alternative,
if you be at a race and somebody would give you the trophy before
yeah,
running the race, like, here's your medal.
yeah,
It would have no value. Like, it's the whole idea of a medal is that it reminds you of the effort that it took you to do it. So
yeah,
the medal is just a symbol.
and it's a symbol of some striving and some difficulty and some challenges that you overcame. And then
So yeah.
Alternatively, though, if the game is too difficult, so for example, if you're a tennis player and you went down and played with your friend who's never played, that's not going to be enjoyable because they're not going to be able to get the ball over the net, and
Or
they're
you're
going
going
to
to
hit it
play with
horribly.
Djokovic in his top game. It's also not
Exactly,
enjoyable.
that's exactly the same. If you play with him, it's also going to be terrible because it's so you want the challenge of life or the challenge of the cosmic game to be as closely matched to your abilities as possible. And this is where the concept of the flow state, and we might talk about that in a future episode, but the idea of the flow state comes when your challenges that you're taking on are as closely matched as possible to your capacities.
Yeah,
And
that's actually the zone of most enjoyment, right? When you're
exactly.
just able to do with all the skills at your disposal, you're able to solve this problem or this challenge.
Yeah, and then the other part of that, the optimal difficulty, is that it cannot be so clearly predestined that so say that there's a game going on in this universe and it's the cosmic game, and that there's two forces that are constantly in flux. There's the forces of light and the divine, and there's the forces of darkness and ignorance. And those forces are constantly coming and going and pushing back and forth
Yeah,
against each other.
it's the battle between good and evil, right? That's like
Exactly. And if it was
the
too
trope of so many movies and series and fantasy novels.
Yeah, but if it was too clear or too obvious that the divine would always win, it would
Mm.
not be a real game, and it would not be
Yeah.
really truly enjoyable in the deepest possible sense. So there needs to be some balance between the forces of light and the forces of ignorance. And I think you see that in our world. Like at the moment, sometimes it's easy for people to feel as though the forces of ignorance are in the ascendant position at the moment.
Are
And
in the what?
they are in the ascendant position.
Okay.
They're in the
They're on the
stronger
rise.
position. You could perhaps, some
Yeah.
people would argue that just from superficial look at things. But so you want that to be really those two forces. You
Evenly
want
matched.
you want them to be evenly matched. Exactly.
I
So
agree.
that's my third requirement for the cosmic
Yeah,
game.
and it is said in the Indian scriptures that God created the asuras, which are the undivine beings, let's say the agents of the darkness, before he created the devas, the divine beings. Because the asuras, to create them, it gave him so much joy. That's actually in the scriptures. Like God created the asuras like a second before he created the devas,
Of
just to
course.
give him joy.
Yeah.
And I think it was Sri Aurobindo who said, somebody asked him, why did God create evil or like undivine beings? And his answer, to thicken the plot.
Yeah, because
I love that.
you can imagine life would be some sort of soap opera, or not even a soap opera, like some sort of bucolic tale of simple people living simple lives with no troubles and no dramas. At some point, as some sort of idyllic.
That's heaven. I think that's heaven you're describing. Like
Yeah, but
maybe life is like that out there
yeah,
when you rest between your lives.
but the thing is as well, it's quite clear that as soon as you made some sort of idyllic utopia, people would start trying to break things just to feel as though something was happening. And
Yeah.
so that's the type of beings we are. We want something to grapple with. And I think that's one of the problems, because we have solved so many of our problems as human beings at this point in time with, say, war and disease and famine. Then we've gone down to more and more lower level problems, and we start arguing about the finer points, the details, rather than celebrating the fact that, most people have enough to eat and most people are not in a state of conflict. And most people have pretty good physical security. We don't celebrate that. Instead, we start arguing about the next level of problems down. So I think
Yeah.
that's part of our nature. So this is another thing I want to see. I mentioned this before, but for this cosmic game, I want to see signs of it manifest in human behavior and the way we live, the way we operate, the things that we enjoy and the things that we're drawn towards. I want to see some hints of this cosmic game operating already in the human world. So I want it not to be a set of ideas that's completely divorced from our experience of life.
So can you give some examples of that? What you mean?
So I think like a great example is like you were talking about is our absolute love and fascination of watching stories being acted out, and especially seeing that age-old battle between good and evil, between people choosing a path of righteousness or choosing the path of ignorance. And so when we see those things, there's something in us, some deeper part of us, I believe, that resonates, because
For
what
sure.
we're seeing is acted out is inherent to the cosmic game.
Right. I think that's why stories like The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter became such worldwide phenomena. Like if you look at the most famous stories over the globe, like those two, they are in principle, the battle between good and evil. I mean, that's the main theme of those stories. And that's why they caught fire so much. And I think they touched like a really deep nerve there, like a really deep, meaningful theme that we are all, we're all in. This is the game. This is the battle between good and evil.
Exactly. So that's beautifully put. And so that's what I'm touching on there. So we want to see signs of this cosmic game manifest in human behavior and the way we operate in the world and the things that we enjoy. Another good example of that for me is the idea of hide and seek. There's a good theory that hide and seek is one of the first games that you play as a human being. So when you have a young child and you cover your face, you hide, and then you reappear, it gives the young child so much joy. So hide and seek, there seems to be something about that has some deep remembrance of some part of the cosmic game here that we're
Well,
playing.
I mean, that is the cosmic game. I mean, God is basically hiding from our, from our sight, from our senses. And if you seek him, sometimes you can find him. But most of the time, although he's omnipresent, he's everywhere, he's still hiding. So this is the big mystery, right? One
Yeah,
of the big
and
mysteries of life.
that's because that's what some people would argue. They would say, well, if God is everywhere and God is with us at all times, why does he not show himself? And
Yes.
my argument is, well, go back to point 3. He wants the game to be optimally difficult.
Yeah.
And so he's not going
He's
to
not
make
going
it.
to give it away.
He's
He's not
not
going
going
to
to
say,
just,
hey, here I
hey,
am.
you guys, here I am. So that's that point. And then,
But I would say if you sincerely seek, you will find God.
yeah,
If you do the effort that is required, which is well documented in the spiritual literature,
yeah,
if you practice your spiritual disciplines, you pray, meditate, you will experience God. I mean, I'm speaking from my own experience, and I know many seekers who have gone through those processes, and so it is possible to find God. But don't use your 5 senses.
very wise. So my last point that my final requirement for the cosmic game is I want it to logically make some sense, but I also want it to experientially make sense as well. So I want it I want to somehow, if I try and envisage it, it has some beauty and some elegance, and I can I can understand it in some way. And
You
obviously,
mean from the philosophical point of view, you want it to
yeah,
make sense
I want it
in
to
that
make
way?
sense in some way. And of course, there's going to be things about this universe and the way that the Supreme went about creating that is going to be inscrutable to me because of my limitations. But I want there to be the possibility that I could understand it in some way. But I also
Mm.
experientially want to feel some truth to it. So it's this sort of idea that when I think about it, when I talk about it, or the experiences that I've had on my journey so far, I want them to be revealing some small aspect of it to give me some clues that I'm on the right track. I don't
So
want
how
it
do
to,
you experience that in your life? Like what is your experiential
yeah.
evidence?
So let's go back and look at the whole cosmic game overall. So those are my requests to
Can
this.
you can you can you read them out one by one just quickly?
Yeah, so I want the cosmic game to make the suffering of this universe worthwhile. I want it to solve the hard problem of where does consciousness originate from? What is the nature of consciousness? I want it to be optimally difficult so it's meaningful over the longest period of time. I want to see signs of it manifest in the human world and our experiences of it. And I want it to make some sense both logically but also experientially.
Okay.
And so and so
And would you say that the cosmic game has fulfilled those requirements
yeah, so let's look
so
what
far as you can see?
for me personally, it's been richly rewarding beyond my imagination. And that is very much my heartfelt position. The universe is so magical and mysterious, but so elegant and beautiful in the way that it seems to be structured. But
So
let's
how come that so many, I agree with you, but how come that so many people do not experience that? They feel life is tough, hard, there's no meaning there. It is just an uphill battle. I mean, there's many people who are miserable and don't feel that beauty and elegance that you just described.
yeah. So let's first of all touch on like what I truly think the cosmic game is. So what is the supreme being is attempting to do through this experience? And so we talked about the supreme being has all capacities, is everywhere, is eternal. And so one aspect of that this game is allowing the supreme being to experience limitations. That's one small aspect. But for me to think about, try and put myself in that consciousness, what would it be like to be everything, everywhere, all at once?
All at once. There's a
Like,
famous movie title there.
exactly. It's a wondrous film as well.
Yeah, it's not my cup of tea, but we talked about that already.
So what would be, how could you truly experience and and enjoy that experience? How could you most deeply and meaningfully enjoy the experience of being the creator, of being the divine consciousness?
Yeah, it's by creating limitation and by
Yeah,
experiencing that which you are not.
yeah, but it's also something even more than that. It's the forgetting of the self. It's the forgetting of what you are. It's the forgetting of your true nature. And it's in the remembrance then. If you can truly make yourself forget what you truly are, and then go on one of the great heroic journeys to return to the point where you awake again and remember who you truly are, the joy and the meaning that that is going to provide to you, that is a game that you could play across billions of years. That is a game that is going to make, for me, all of the suffering of life worthwhile. If you are the one who is doing this to yourself as well. So it's not that the universe is doing this to you. You are doing this to yourself. And that's one of the things
Beautiful.
that people really suffer with. They feel as though that something outside of them is causing the suffering in their life. But I really believe that you are the universe. You are the consciousness that has brought this universe into being, and you are giving these experiences to yourself. But
Yeah,
if
no,
you
I
can go,
agree.
if you,
Your soul has made a conscious decision at some point to enter into this game, knowing
yeah,
perfectly well all the trials and tribulations that you're going to face. And it is said, with all that knowledge, it has said, yes, I want to play this game.
yeah. And so if you can go on that great journey of uncovering and remembering who you truly are, and you have to do it in the way that you talked about. So you took us through step by step. So you're going to start by bringing your consciousness into the mineral kingdom, and you're going to spend thousands, if not millions of years in the mineral aspect. And then you're going to slowly, over time, you're going to one day move into the plant consciousness. And then you're going to spend thousands and thousands of years in the plant consciousness. And then at some point, you're going to one day make the momentous step up into that great form of life, the animal consciousness. And each time you're getting slowly but surely here on earth closer to your truer nature as the universal consciousness. And the thing is, you have to do it here in the game. When you're not here, when you return back to the inner world between your lifetimes, you return to this more vast consciousness. You return to this consciousness that is connected back to the source of all
I mean,
creation.
you do. So the forgetfulness happens on Earth. I think that's a
Exactly.
feature of Earth life. You
It is a
forget,
feature. It's a
right?
feature of the game. For the game to work, you have to, when you come here, it's called being veiled. And so when you come here, your consciousness is veiled. So you forget everything that you forget what you truly are. And so that is the great game. And that's the great challenge the Supreme has set themselves to come here onto earth and to remember who they truly are. And
Yes. Yeah, and that ties into the idea of reincarnation. Like, why don't we remember our past lives? It's because they're
exactly.
veiled. Yeah, they're behind the veil. And it's very much like sleeping and dreaming, right? So when
Yeah.
we sleep every night, we have these amazing adventures in our dreams. We go places, and these totally feel real at the time. And then when we wake up, like, we don't remember them. And so it can be said this is a very real analogy for the past life experience. When you come back, you don't remember your past life. It's like a dream. It was real when it happened, but now it's like it's ephemeral. You don't have any memory anymore. And so, in a small way, this everyday what we experience of going to sleep, having dreams, waking up, not remembering them, it is almost like it mimics the vaster experience of having life after life, these
Yes.
different dreams.
Yeah.
And
No.
that kind of ties into your point where you say, I want to see some evidence, something that mirrors the game in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, exactly. You want to see some hints and some clues that perhaps things are more interesting and complex than the material, simply the material world. And so I think these types of things are things that do give us that clue. And there's one other thing that I really always find quite interesting. The idea that we accept the idea that you can wake up after having never been gone to sleep. So we all accept that in this world because we've experienced it. Like we're living that out. We one day woke up after having never gone to sleep. So as a baby, when we were born here into the earth plane, we suddenly have woken up here. And it wasn't like we can ever remember falling asleep. So we one day woke up without ever
Yes.
falling to sleep.
Yeah.
And then at the other end of the spectrum is when you go to sleep. You could say that's like going to sleep and not waking up again. And so to us, it looks like that's what's happening. It looks like when the baby is born, he's just suddenly woken up here. But perhaps we're not seeing the other end of the experience. Is at some point he went to sleep and we didn't see him go to sleep. And his consciousness now is awakening again to take form.
Yeah.
So I think there's some nice, there's some nice continuity of that flow, that wave of, existence, non-existence, existence, non-existence.
And how would you solve the heart problem?
So this is really interesting. So like one of the problems they have for people who look into the hard problem is they'll say, okay, because the hard problem is only a problem if you're a materialist. If you're a materialist, you'll say, oh, there is only matter. So awareness and consciousness is simply the functioning of matter. But we get to a point where the functioning of matter no longer explains the conscious experiences we're having. And so this is why they call it the hard problem. They say there's easy problems. Okay, why do you feel cold? Or why do you feel hungry? Or why do you feel this or that? And these things we can explain more readily from the material functioning of the material world. But there's many states of consciousness that go far beyond what you would need for the functioning of the material world. So there's some lack of, it does not make sense in that way. And so this is,
yeah, go ahead.
This is something that's really cool, though, is that there's quite a number of people inside the world of philosophy of mind who look into this problem. And the solution they have come up with is called panpsychism. And panpsychism says that there is a small amount of consciousness in every single part of the universe. So it says there's a small amount of consciousness inside the rocks, inside the trees, inside the animals, inside us, inside everything.
This is part of science?
This is part of science, and this is part of like modern cutting-edge philosophy. They have gone back to panpsychism, which is hilarious because this is the same thing that ancient human beings believed for the longest period of time. So the shamanistic and the animistic traditions throughout the world always believed that there was a soul in the river, there was a soul in the stone, there was a soul in the tree. So people intuitively knew this thousands and thousands of years ago and lived this out for thousands of years. And it's only very recently we've gotten rid of this idea. And so it's wonderful for me to see that some branches of science at the forefront, they're moving back towards ideas that I think.
But what I love about that, and just to make sure we don't want to slam science, we
No.
have great respect for science, of course. But the great thing about that is if science rediscovers it, it kind of lifts it to a higher level almost. When you see it, you can appreciate its complexity and its elegance much more. First it was a belief that people told each other orally and was believed maybe psychically. But now to also lift it up to almost the mental planes and to understand, actually that is, that's an idea that we can discuss and appreciate in all its complexity. Makes it even, I think it lifts the idea up to a higher level. So,
I myself was very happy to see this idea of panpsychism returning, because for me, it's the only theory that really makes sense for the type of universe that I experience personally. Yeah. But the cool thing about it, and this is the thing that makes me really smile, is so they'll say, okay, so a rock is a series of atoms and molecules clumped together. So it has a certain level of consciousness, which is obviously very small. And then an animal or a plant is a much more complex series of atoms and molecules clumped together. And so they're creating a certain type of consciousness. And then a human being, we're a much more complex combination of atoms and molecules. And each of these atoms and molecules has a consciousness. It has this panpsychism is saying there's spiritual consciousness inside those. And so when we add all of those together, we get human consciousness, self-aware consciousness. So the problem is, though, how do you stop going up to higher and higher levels? Because then I could say, okay, well, if all of these consciousness, all of these small parts of consciousness come together and they make self-aware human consciousness, what happens with the consciousness of the entire universe? When we bring all of that together and we look at that as a whole, then what does that become?
Maybe it becomes an AI.
Hopefully not an AI, but you could in some way make use the same argument to continue up to higher and higher levels and make the argument that the universe itself is conscious, and the universe itself is a consciousness. So there is a consciousness to the entire universe. And so for me, that's very exciting.
So what I liked also is we talked about this person that was interviewed, or you saw the interview where he talked about lives between lives, like the pre-birth experience.
Yes.
And I remember that you told me that he ran into this soul just before, or when the game had already started, he ran into this soul and it looked so bright and beautiful and
Yeah.
powerful. And he said, like, what have you done? How come you're so beautiful and great, brilliant? And the soul told him, I'm playing this new game called Incarnations on Earth,
Mm.
right?
Exactly. Incarnation in the material world was
Oh,
what
yeah.
he said. And
Yes.
so that's something like, so if we want to zoom out even further, so we're here inside this particular universe that seems to have been the game we're part of has been playing for 13.7 billion years, it seems. Nearly all of the religious traditions have told us that this is not the only level of existence, though, that there's higher worlds. So you could, Christianity's got the idea of heaven, but in the Eastern traditions, they've got a much more complex schema of the universe where there's 7 higher worlds and there's 7 lower worlds. But it doesn't really matter for this point exactly what the structure of it is, what you believe it is. But the idea is that there is many other beings or souls having incarnation inside time, inside this reality that we're not aware of. And so there's beings that are having incarnations on some subtle inner higher world, and they're having their own type of experience with souls of a similar type to them, and they're having particular experiences. And for many of them, they have never, or they do not take incarnation here in the material plane. And so, like you were saying, he came across a being that had taken an incarnation in the material plane. And for him, it was completely shocking. He had never seen a soul as beautiful and radiant as the soul. And he said to the soul, and these are the little snippets that make it really real to me. He said to the soul, what have you been doing? He said, I've been taking the incarnation in the material plane. And he said, what is that? And he said, I would tell you, it's really hard. It's incredibly challenging. And he said, I really want to do it. And he said, and the soul said back to him, yeah, that's what they all say.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, because when the souls look down from heaven to earth, many of them are frightened by the darkness that they see on earth. Like, it is
Yeah.
hard.
And
And
it is a
this is
radical thing to do, to go from being a portion of infinite consciousness connected back to the source to taking this incarnation where you remove all connection, you become veiled and separate yourself entirely. And he was talking about when you're going to Earth, that there's a technology or a space that you have to go through. And he said it was basically like stepping it into like a pit of tar. It was like black tar. And that was the veiling process. And so there was a certain type of beings that interact with you, and they're like technicians that understand this technology very well, and they help you go through the process. But it's this idea that in that moment of taking incarnation and bringing your soul here into the material plane, it is an absolute disconnection from everything that you truly are. It's the complete annihilation or forgetting of your true nature. And so that's why you see babies here, and they immediately start crying, I think.
they're crying. It's traumatic. Like,
It's a
birth is a
shock.
traumatic experience.
It's a
Yeah,
shock
of course. Yeah.
to be here and be disconnected. So I've heard of many other beings looking down at Earth and thinking, oh my God, the people who take incarnation here are so incredibly brave.
Yeah, and that's what I want to, that's what I love about this story, and I want to, shout out to our listeners, to all humans here on Earth. Well done. You
Yeah,
know, kudos to you. You've taken the plunge. You have chosen this path of incarnations in the material world, and you're extremely brave and courageous. And even the most downtrodden, miserable person on Earth, like, is extremely courageous to the
yeah,
depths of his soul for having taken that plunge. And so I love that thought. It's such a wonderful thought to celebrate everybody here on earth that you see
yeah,
who is a soul who has taken that decision.
yeah.
So, a round of applause to humanity for that.
Yeah,
Really.
I totally agree. And it's something really wonderful to have some perspective as well about how blessed you are to simply be here, having an experience. And I try and remind myself of this all the time, just what a miraculous experience it is to be here in this universe, to be conscious, to be able to experience this marvel. Um, and the opportunity to grow and learn and make mistakes and to learn from them and develop our consciousness, to develop our awareness, offer
Because I think
kindness.
that comes together with the idea of experiencing limitation for the divine and omnipotent, is the idea of growth. If this slowly regaining that experience, that is also a thrill, right? It's like the remembering process that is the big game. It's like, through all the experiences that you're doing, through all the ups and downs, the struggles, the hardships, the challenges, you slowly, chip away of that darkness and you get insights into your true nature. And
Yeah.
that is such an amazing process.
And that's a lovely point to remember, because if we look at our own lives, it's normally when we're moving towards mastery of any field, like when we start a new activity and we start making progress in that activity, whether it's learning a new language or a musical instrument, playing sports, doing to drive a car, whatever it is, it's the progress that gives us the joy. It's the sense of movement towards some sense of mastery. And it's
Yeah.
often once you become a real master of a topic, perhaps it doesn't give you that same thrill as it did in the beginning anymore. And so that's why it's always great to try new things and put yourself outside your comfort zone and learn.
Yeah, I agree with all of those except for the driving aspect. I mean, I tried driving a car 3 times and failed 3 times. And
Yeah,
so
so perhaps
never
it
reached the
wasn't,
mastery level.
well, then perhaps wasn't your soul's
It
desire.
wasn't my soul's mission to drive a
No.
car. So I'm happily on my bike. But yeah, but I mean, um, beautiful points you made there about the conditions. I love it.
Yeah, so and I think that people actually could get to a point where one of the most uninspiring things for me is when I hear this idea that we live in a dumb and blind universe. I'm just like, what? It's like you could choose any reality you want. You could imagine any reality, and that's the one you've chosen. You're like, right, I'm going to go with we live in a
Well,
dumb and blind universe.
probably somebody has chosen it for them, their culture.
Yeah, exactly. And so that sort of idea is whenever things are feeling when your life's going along smoothly and everything's going fine, it's like maybe you can tolerate it. But as soon as you run into some of the hardship and the challenges of life, like what are you supposed to rely on when you believe the universe is just meaningless and empty?
Yes.
It just so easily allows you to slip into nihilism. And so for me, it's one of the most dangerous and saddest things is to see people even telling that story to each other, sharing that story or trying to impose that story on other people is such a sad thing, because I would rather believe something like, because you've got to look at the quality of your life. Like, even if you chose to believe something that was not 100% accurate, but it made your life wonderfully joyful and meaningful and enjoyable, and you had connection. And I mean, to me, that's already more successful than perhaps being slightly more accurate and thinking,
Yeah, I mean,
something
do
else.
what works. Don't do what is true.
Yeah, don't
Because you
try.
don't know what is true. You
You
don't know
can
what is
never,
true.
you can never know for certain what is exactly the nature of the universe, I wouldn't say. So I think even for the great spiritual masters, there's some part of the game that is hidden from them even. So I think it's
Yeah.
not until you're off the field of play that you really understand everything. You can see
Yeah, so
everything.
let me ask that question I asked you earlier again. What
But
about all
yes,
those people who are miserable and who feel that life is a battle, is
yeah.
devoid of meaning, and are just suffering?
Yeah. So I would invite them to make life into a great adventure. Because the thing is, leaving space for the unknown and a mystery to exist, that allows you to move forward in the world with some curiosity, with some enthusiasm, and with some open-mindedness to perhaps pursue knowledge and information through your own experience. Don't just trust what other people tell you. And I think we only need to look at the information environment in the last 5 or 6 years to realize just relying on other people to tell you things is fraught with danger. It's like your friend could share something with you on social media and you share it with other people. And then a few days later, you find it was completely false. Or now you'll find it was AI generated and this person never said that or never did that. So relying on other people to tell you what sort of universe you live in is for me the worst possible position to put yourself in, because you can be then betrayed and
Okay, but then if I'm really critical, what about the spiritual teachers? I mean, we rely on them to. Isn't it nice to have some form of guidance? Because if we only get from our own experience, we feel like we're blind, we're just groping around, and if we can't rely on anything, how do we go forward?
very, very good question. What I would say is look around and see who seems to be enjoying the game of life the most over a long period of time as well. Like, I don't mean someone who's just won the lottery or signed their first big contract and they've gone and bought a sports car and, they've gone to Vegas and are
Yeah,
gambling.
yeah. Don't watch the Instagram, Lambo
Not some sort of
posts with the
short-term
Lamborghinis.
hedonistic type
Yeah.
of happiness, but someone look around the world and see, okay, who can you see in the world who seems to have lived a life that was full of enthusiasm and meaning and purpose over a really long period of time? And I would say, if I look around in the world, I would say there's only because I would say those people are probably people who have mastered the game of life to a higher degree than nearly everyone else. And so if I look around the world and say, okay, who do I think has really mastered the game of life? I would say, like, over a long period of time, I would say the great spiritual masters. So we look back to, we have Krishna, we have the Buddha, we have Christ. And then in recent times, we have Ramakrishna, we have Sri Aurobindo. And for me, Sri Chinmoy fits in with this entirely in this category. And so these spiritual masters, because if you think about the universe and the true nature of the universe is a spiritual universe, then the people who have really reached and attained the highest goal of life are the spiritual masters, because that's the true and highest game that is played here on earth. And
Yeah.
so as well as them, though, if we look at some other people in recent times, I would say someone like Mother Teresa or Nelson Mandela. These are people who maintained their enthusiasm for their task despite unbelievable hardship and suffering over an incredibly long period of time. And so
Yeah.
that to me, it shows me that these people have found something that is real and true, or real and true in the way that allows you to live a good life and live a life in tune with your highest ideals over a long period of time. So I'd say look around and say to yourself, okay, who do I think has really achieved a life of true happiness? Because nearly everyone we know, maybe most people we know have been following the model of trying to attain material comfort and security, and then they've retired, and then they're still facing the same problems and struggles they faced on the whole journey there, because they never transformed their nature. So I wouldn't say that the average person who has, I mean, people do become wiser over time, I think. Hopefully, we hope the
Hopefully.
experience of life can act as a teacher. But yeah, I would really look around and try and be really truthful and say who seems to have really played the game well in a way that has allowed them to live a truly meaningful life over the longest possible period of time. And so for me,
Yeah, and so if you say the spiritual masters, like there's so many instructions they've left us in which how to go about life and attain that state of deep long-term happiness. And so I would say try it out. Give it 2 years of your life. Like you have
correctly,
nothing to lose. If it has been a tried and tested method over the centuries, many seekers who followed in their footsteps have attained to these higher states of consciousness. I would say if you feel life is meaningless, try out the philosophy of somebody who says no, life does have meaning and there is reward if you follow these steps.
and the great thing about spiritual tradition is it proves itself to you over time. So it's not something that is proved to you by someone outside of you telling you how things are. It's you. The teachers have been so generous, like the great teachers over time have been incredibly generous with sharing the insights and the ideals and the path that they use to attain their realization or their awakening. So let's say that's what the spiritual masters have really done. Like the Buddha actually means the awakened one. It's he who has woken up. And so before that, like all of us, we're still in some level of living in a dream. And that's one of the mistakes that's often made when people think about, especially Indian philosophy. They think about this idea of Maya or illusion. They think that the entire universe is perhaps an illusion and doesn't actually exist. But I think the illusion is the seriousness with which we take certain parts of the universe. That's the illusion. We get caught up in the character we're playing, and we get caught up in the material reality around us. That is the illusionary part of existence. And so
Right.
we've been living in this illusion where we've given too much value to the material world around us and to our character that we're playing. And what the spiritual masters are trying to do is allow us to unlearn some of those things that we've picked up through our journey through life and return to who we truly are. And then at some point along that journey, there's going to be a moment of an awakening, an
Yeah, and
illumination.
so that's nice to tie the whole story of reincarnation back to the final goal or
Yes,
attainment of enlightenment, because once we enter into the human kingdom, we're kind of on the home straight in our cosmic game, because now we are, well, there's still a long way to go if you enter into the human life, but now you have a chance to reach the finish, which I would say is total remembrance of your divine nature, which is called God realization, self realization, enlightenment, many different terms for it. But that is the experience where the soul recognizes and realizes itself, its own full nature in the material world, in this body. in this physical body, on this physical earth. And then you have access to infinite peace, light, and bliss, like the spirit worlds that are natural to the soul are then yours to experience in this material world. And that is actually what you see the spiritual masters living. They are living this life of being a realized soul. They know to the core who they truly are. They've gone through sometimes hundreds, thousands, dozens of incarnations, depends on the soul, but they've gone to many, many lives. And then also you remember everything. So you remember your whole past, all your previous lives. You're able to see the whole journey leading up to that moment. And that is, I think, the fantastic finish, after which you realize that the game doesn't really finish there, but continues in a different way.
Yeah.
So then there's a whole other game to play, and we'll get into that maybe at some future episodes.
Yeah, and one of the great points that I always like to make about this is that, as we talked about in a previous episode, that we have expectations for experiences in our life. Very rarely, I think almost never, do the experiences we have ever live up to the expectations we have of them. And so Sri Chinmoy had a wonderful comment he made about realization, about realizing and waking up to your truest nature, your highest nature. And he said, before realization, the price is far too high. After realization, the price is far, far too low. And so for me, that's wonderful to know, because nearly everything else in some way is a letdown. You win an Olympic gold medal, 6 months later, you're depressed. You achieve the highest heights in your professional career or in any other field, and a few days later, everyone has forgotten about this and moved on.
Yeah.
And there's something
But
about
this experience of realization, it trumps all expectations.
yeah,
So that's good to know.
and that's the thing as well, is you have a finite period of time here. And so if you can use it to consciously move towards a goal that is transcendently valuable, that will be valuable in this lifetime, but will also be valuable in any future lifetimes that you have, it seems using all of your time here on earth to move towards that goal would be the best possible use of your time, because otherwise everything else here is fleeting. Everything else here is temporary. All your wealth and success, your fame, your friends, at some point, everything will let you down and will disappear. And if you can instead put your time and effort into moving towards something that is the one thing that will remain with you throughout time, which is your spiritual progress, then that seems to be such a good use of your time and such a wise thing to do.
Yeah, because your spiritual progress does transition over from life to life. As the spiritual masters have taught us, that the progress you make in this incarnation, like when you die and you go into your next life and you pick up again where you left off in your spiritual journey. So not in your material journey, you start again with zero, and if that's your goal, you have to build up your fortune all the way up again. But if your goal is spiritual fortunes, then you continue. So all that spiritual wealth is stored in the bank. And when you pick up in your next life, you just continue from where you were, and that's why sometimes people, I feel, for instance, I have lived a spiritual life before in my past incarnations, because in this life, I entered into the spiritual life when I was 20 years old, very young. But immediately I was so inspired and I felt such a resonance with the spiritual life that I felt I have to do this. It is so strong. And so I feel that I kind of could pick up from wherever I left off in my previous lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And so for anyone, as we said, for those who are questioning the meaning of anything, at least trying, at least if you take an aim at something that's ahead of you and move towards it, you can perhaps start to reveal something to yourself that you perhaps could not see. Because the problem is, when you're standing where you've always been standing, you can only see what you know. And so it's not until you start actually moving forward in your journey that things start to reveal themselves to you. If you just live in one valley all your life, you think the entire universe is that one valley. And it's not until someone or you inspire yourself to move out of that valley, to climb up to the ridgeline and look out, and you start to see that there's actually a far wider and vaster universe out there. And so give yourself the chance to perhaps start moving somewhere, and you
see
might
where you end up.
yourself.
And so that would be a wonderful thought to end today. I maybe have to give a little disclaimer that we both are still on the journey.
Yes.
And we talk about these things, definitely from personal experience and also from the study of the spiritual masters and the scriptures and everything. Thank you so much for this conversation. And
Thank you.
thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, I would say tell a friend, subscribe, leave a comment or review. We're very grateful for that. And we'll dive into another subjects next week.
Until
So,
then.
until then, thank you.